This is the Outskirts podcast with Tanner and friends. And in this episode, we present to you another installment of interesting interviews, by which we facilitate discussions with people who we find interesting because of their experiences, areas of expertise, or points of view which may or may not align with our own. Please enjoy this interview, the first in a two-part series, with Mr. Scott Schara. You'll want to find a quiet place to sit where you're comfortable feeling and expressing emotion as he leads us on a journey through the life of his amazing grace.
This is titled One Last Time. This was written on October 13th of 2022. That was the 1 year anniversary of Grace's last day on earth. And so it starts with, sometimes you wish you could see her smile one last time. That you could look into those same eyes you gazed into when you cradled her as a newborn baby, and which looked back at yours full of contentment and peace. Sometimes you wish her embrace would return around your waist, that her laughter and sense of humor would ring through the house one last time. Sometimes you wear her brother's green Power Ranger jacket she cherished to feel close to her, or you wear her favorite perfume to have her scent close by, just one more smell. Other times you need the faith she had when you think God has abandoned you for allowing your daughter to leave this world. You yearn for her bravery and faith so pure and true. Why does God need her more than you do after all? One day you'll find out, but right now you want her here one more time. If only you could have her innocence. It's her innocence that brought her such joy, such affection, such love. Oh, if everyone could muster a fraction of that innocence, the world would be at peace. You've never seen anyone hug a stranger the way she did, and you could never bring yourself to do it because that sweet innocence doesn't abide inside of you. It's reserved for God's special ones. Maybe that's why he needed her home, the creator of all things. The creator of all things wanted that hug too. It's strange to read this again. Uh, the days, you can't imagine what these days are like. I mean, I'm working generally about, I don't think I've ever had a day less than 12 hours a day working on Grace's case story, the research, advocacy, the lawsuit, all these things. I mean, um, it's all consuming. And it's good to have it all consuming. I mean, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, but um, it's intense. Since the lawsuit uh, dropped, I've had about 65, I suppose, 65 interviews in the last month. Right after it dropped, I just take anything on because I don't know whose life we're going to save by sharing the story. So I just take them all on. I mean, it's getting to the point where I've got to figure out a little bit of a different plan because I'm running out of gas. But I did 9 interviews in one day. That's intense. And you get done and you just collapse. But I mean, people's lives are being saved because of grace, and that's that keeps a person going.
I'll just read this verse and then I'll ask you about it. So this is what I do with it. This is Mark 10, verse 15. Jesus is speaking. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. And he took them in his arms and blessed them, laying his hands on them. This imagery, right, where the children are coming to him and his disciples are shooing them away. And the whole idea is that he's going to touch them, right? And something was being bestowed, apparently. That thing that Jesus was bestowing on those children, do you believe that that had been bestowed on your daughter, Grace?
Well, very much so. I
Was it,
do. And it never, so you have a 5-year old, he's a lot like Grace. Grace, I don't know what I would say her mental age was, but probably 10, in some regards, 8, in some regards, 14. It just depends on the situation. Uh, but the most fun time of having a kid is when they're in the 5 to 7, 8 range. And the reason is they're innocent and they ask a lot of questions. They're inquisitive, they're obedient by nature. Um, all the things that, when Jesus says you have to be like a child, it's because as we learn the world. So just take a simple example with your son. You mentioned sending him to school. Well, all of a sudden he's going to get acclimated to a different world. There's a lot of programming that's going on in the public schools. So then he's asking questions. I'm positive right now, even though I don't know him. He's asking, why. I mean, they ask it so many times in a row, and all of a sudden he'll get told to him, why do you have to keep asking why all the time? So then it may stop that behavior, which is no good. And so it gets to the point where, we end up using, for men, we use logic to solve God problems. Women end up using emotion in general. And so then that's two sides of the same coin. Both are disobedience. Whereas a child, you know, if God tells you go down those stairs right now, I mean, so you picture that if you told that to your son, he would just do it because he's just going to be obedient. And, that's what God wants from us. But we cannot do it anymore once we become of a certain age, and especially as adults, all of a sudden, why do we have to work on obedience? Well, it's
yeah,
because that's why we've got to be like little children.
it's the exposure to the fallen nature of the world. I want to get into that more later. I wanted you to share some memories or some descriptions of Grace at different periods in her life. So, at infancy, we're talking about roughly 22 years ago.
Well, she was born on September 22nd of 2002. So, we really have to start before infancy, don't we?
Please.
So, you ready for a biology lesson? I, uh, I, I'm going to assume your listeners know about the biology of how Grace was conceived, but what they don't know is my wife and I were 39 years old. I mean, you don't have a baby when you're 39 years old, but we had decided to let God lead in the baby department.
I'm the third daughter of my mom's belly.
We already had a 12 or a 14-year-old. Is that right? I got to process this. Yeah, we had a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old already. And so, we were following the American dream, 2.1 kids, 1.7 dogs, retire at 50 and drink beer on the front porch. That's what we were pursuing. And then we decided to remove the barriers and let God lead. And, about 5 minutes after we removed the barriers, Grace was conceived. So um, I'm not going to discuss the 5 minutes because that's what I assume you're listening
Uh,
to.
We'll let them paint their own picture. Yeah.
So, who could have ever thought that what was going to happen next? Uh, So we never did any of the stuff that you're supposed to do, that they programmed us to do, right? We had a midwife. We didn't do any of the amniocentesis. I don't even think we did an ultrasound, but my wife would know. So we obviously didn't know Grace had Down syndrome. And so when she was born on September 22nd of 2002, I was in the delivery room, and I thought, why, when she was born, I think she has Down syndrome. She just had features, right? A Down syndrome child has some different features. And so I just said to Cindy, I think Grace has, we didn't know she was going to be Grace then, but I think she has Down syndrome. Well, the doctors had this huddle, and they came back shortly after huddling. I could see them in another room through the glass, and they came in and said, we suspect your daughter has Down syndrome, and then said some version of, do you want to keep her? Which was shocking to us. I just had no time for that. And they didn't mean to abort her like somebody would be doing now after the fact. Anything goes today, but they were just assuming that we wouldn't want her, that she would be put up for adoption. They said some version of, we have people waiting in the wings for children such as these. Grace had low oxygen saturation at that point. We ended up, I don't remember why we went to a hospital to have her delivered, even though we had a midwife. But regardless, then I signed a piece of paper to get her transported by ambulance to a hospital that had a NIC unit so that she could be in an oxygen bubble. And so then I asked them to get my wife ready because we're going to go to that hospital. And, they objected to that. Well, she can't go. She's got to stay here. I said, listen, she's coming. We're not going to be in a different hospital than where my daughter is.
No more of this funny conversation.
So I said, I'm going to be bringing the Suburban up to the front door in 20 minutes. So get your doctor to get the paperwork signed, and we're leaving. And so we did. And, ultimately we brought Grace home. There was an encouraging doctor along the way that said to us that with any person, they can be put in two different environments. In one environment, they will flourish, and the other one, they won't. And the sky is the limit with your daughter. And so we had that view. God removed the view of her. I mean, if you look at somebody as disabled, you're going to treat them as disabled. We never did that. It was actually hard for us to even see that Grace had Down syndrome unless she was with other kids. So then we just treated her like normal. Everything was normal. That's one reason that Grace experienced so many things. I think it's three different things. One is, of course, God made her that way. That's primary. We decided to homeschool. And so that was natural for us because we had homeschooled the other two kids from, I think, starting in 4th and 2nd grade. We pulled them out of school. So we homeschooled Grace since day one. My wife did the lion's share of the things. I did the stuff I taught Grace her sense of humor. I taught her how to drive. I taught her how to deer hunt. Grace deer hunted with me. She could shoot a rifle, and she was more accurate than I was. She was awesome. So there was nothing that we didn't do, simply because we didn't look at her as having a disability. We just looked at her as the sky was the limit, and it truly was. On top of that, once you figured out who she was.
Over, you reached 920-428-6029. I'm Grace Emily Schara. Return your call as soon as possible. Soon have a great, wonderful day.
We named her Grace after God's grace. We were picking between grace and faith. Ultimately, we picked Grace, and it was after God's grace. When she learned that, by the way, she of course knew her name, but when she learned why, she would proudly say, she'd say, I was named after one of God's principles. The thing that I remember most when she was really young is Cindy and I took her to a class teaching her how to sign. Between 2 and 3 years old was really neat. Cindy was breastfeeding for, again, now I'm going into biology, so we're not going to get into the details. But the cute thing was when, I can remember, she'd be so tired laying in bed, but she wanted more mama's milk. And so the sign for more, she'd go like this, more. Milk. Oh my gosh. I just thought that was so funny. So the sign, so like for a frog, she would sign frog and, she would do with her tongue would go up. Mm. So that's the sign for frog. She wasn't doing the regular every letter signing. It was called children's signs or kid signs or something like that. So she would sign and she couldn't talk very well. So at the beginning, we started horse riding with her. It's called hippotherapy. Of course, if you ride hippos, it's called horse therapy. But the hippotherapy really helped her. And all of a sudden she would piece words together, piece phrases together, and pretty soon she was a jabberbox.
Travis, all of us to Butt Cheeks Presley.
So that's an early memory of Grace. Even before that, Down syndrome children generally have low muscle tone, so we'd practice these muscle tone exercises. There was a couple of therapists who would come to the house and teach us these muscle strengthening exercises. And I can remember I would tell Grace to stiff leg me. This is when she's really young, 6 to 9 months old. And then she just stiffen up her legs. So it was just neat. You could see, boy, she's paying attention to what's going on, and she knew what was going on. So that was when she was really young. Then she could start talking, and the next thing after that is she became an escape artist. So you had to pay attention. I mean, wherever you went. I mean, as she got older, then we could let her free range and be with other kids, and but when she was younger, she'd want to get outside. We live out in the country, and if you're in a store, she'd want to wander off, and she didn't care where her parents were. And so we really had to keep an eye on her. We put a big cow type bolt on the back door just to make sure she couldn't get out. But a funny story relative to that, you can picture this. So just picture, if you're alone with your 5-year-old, so you've got to go into the bathroom. So you're not at home. You got to go to the bathroom, right? All right. Yeah. So now you're not going to leave your 5-year-old outside the bathroom waiting for you, right? He's got to come in with you, right?
Yeah.
So when I would take Grace by myself, she'd have to come into the bathroom with me. And I'd just say, okay, Grace, just stand over here and wait while Dad goes to the bathroom. So she'd stand there. And one particular time, there's in the bathroom I was in, there's 2 urinals. So there's a guy at the urinal on the left, and I'm in the urinal on the right. The drill. Yeah. You take a leak, and then you got to shake it off, right? That's just what guys do. Again, another biology lesson. I didn't know that was going to be our theme, but we might as well keep up with it.
That's great.
Anyway, so Grace says, she was probably, I don't know, 5 to 6 years old, very observant kid. So, I'm going to the bathroom, and Grace says, "Dad, aren't you going to yank it?" Yeah. And the guy next to me and me, we just start, you can't stop laughing, right?
Especially with the vernacular translation in this culture today. That's hilarious. Oh, man.
She was just a joy. Of course we took her everywhere. I don't know that we ever got a babysitter. The two older kids would be built-in babysitters, but we just didn't have a desire to ever leave her. So, we may have gone out to dinner a couple of times without the kids, but that just wasn't our nature. It was always bring her every place. Another funny story when she was young, this may have been at the same time frame, like 5, 6 years old, I introduced her to my stupid sense of humor.
I'm a comedian. My dad is definitely a comedian.
How I did that is I must have did something wrong, because my wife said, well, you got to go to Walmart and get whatever. And I hate Walmart. So that's why I think I did something wrong. So I said, Grace, come along with Dad. So we're driving to Walmart, and I said to Grace, just so you know, Grace, everybody who shops at Walmart is a zombie. And so we get into Walmart.
We have a situation in the egg bunker. Dale, please come to the egg bunker.
And she pokes one of the guys in the stomach when we're in the store. And she said, Dad, they're not zombies. So she started to pick up on my literal sense of humor. And we could have gone on the road with it after, she really understood it and got it.
What is brown and sticky? A stick.
She was sharp.
She sure was. Can you tell me about her fascination with Elvis?
We were talking about this last night. So she got exposed to Elvis because my wife had hip replacement in September of 2016, and she had to do a lot of staying in the chair. And I'm working, so they must have stopped at a video store and they picked up a bunch of Elvis movies, and all of a sudden Grace was hooked. It's funny to think about how hooked she was. She really got into it, and she was smart. She knew all the trivia. So then we made a trip to Graceland. Ultimately, that led to Grace writing a fan letter to Priscilla, Elvis's wife, care of Graceland. And Priscilla ended up calling Grace and invited us to Graceland to meet her.
That's amazing. I just became a Priscilla fan. I mean, it doesn't get much bigger than Priscilla Presley in the world, right?
Well,
That's like the queen.
right. They became legitimate friends. They emailed each other regularly. Priscilla was a special lady, and Grace is a special lady. When we went to Graceland, Grace had a 45-minute one-on-one meeting with Priscilla. It was
Amazing.
really neat. We
That
have
is so special.
a whole bunch of those pictures on Grace's website.
I saw her Elvis routine on the website. It's fantastic. It's so beautiful, hilarious, and cute.
Love me, girl, love me sweet. Never let me go. Make my life complete. I love you so. Love me.
I thought you were gonna say it was part of your wife's therapy for hip replacement. The Elvis gyration. Yeah.
Well, the absolute funniest story of Grace. It's borderline R-rated, but it's another biology lesson if you want to keep up with that theme. It was regarding the hip replacement. So do you want me to go there?
Oh, please, yeah.
All right. So January of 2017, we went to the doctor's office to do basically a status report of how the healing is going from the hip replacement. So all of us are in the doctor's office, and you got to picture the room. So the doctor is in the front of the room facing us. So immediately to his right is the big screen showing the x-ray. And so Cindy is sitting closest to the screen. Grace is second closest, and I'm the furthest away. So we're all sitting in chairs looking at this screen with the hip replacement, and the doctor is pointing out everything. You can see the titanium pin, and Grace turns to me. You can't make this up. She turns to me and says, "Dad, don't be looking at the crotch area." That's how smart she was. Just process that. Of course you're going to be looking at the crotch area, right? What other choice you have? You got two choices: a titanium pin or a crotch area. Grace caught me. And then the doctor can't stand it. He starts laughing and he says, "Nice."
Hilarious.
Yeah. So that's how sharp she was.
How old was she in 2017?
15.
15, yeah.
15.
That's a 15-year-old joke.
Right. Yeah, like I said, in some ways she was really consistent with her age. In some ways she wasn't.
You guys were a part of a co-op?
A homeschool co-op.
At that age, she attended dances. Can you describe how did she perceive those types of interactions, and what was that experience like for her?
Hello, earthly dad. Had too much fun at the prom. Was dancing with the girls, his Rosa dolls, all other girls. And the last song I danced with was Josiah Nelson. So I was like brother spirit through him a little bit. He asked me to dance with him. It's so touching my heart. I love that. please let me know you're okay. I love you, really.
It was fantastic. We did not have her participate in any of the special needs type things. So she played softball. She did horse riding. She played violin. She danced. The co-op, everything. She was fully integrated. So she was never in Special Olympics or any of the things that are for disabled kids. We just always did everything with the other kids. She wouldn't necessarily do the same things as a senior in high school. So she would have things that were appropriate for her. But that was the beauty of homeschooling. You can tailor everything you do around what your son or daughter's strengths and weaknesses are. One of the funny things about that co-op, I got to just share this. This is a hoot. Grace was pretty good at public speaking, and they really promoted this in the co-op, which I think is right. Because if you think about in life, if you had just a few things that you could tell any child, these are the most important things you could learn in life so that you're prepared for the world. I would tell them, number one is you've got to be able to communicate both orally and in writing. If you can't do that, you're not going to do very well. And you've got to be able to do math in your head. You got to have a sense of things in your head, right? So get off of that calculator and do stuff in your head. And you've got to be able to organize, because there's going to be so much coming at you. So this is all stuff that really is not taught anymore.
Right.
Okay. So anyway, relative to speaking, so the co-op would have every kid do a speech every week. Okay. So one particular week, Grace was not ready for her speech. And she said, Dad, can you help me? I don't have my speech ready. So I said, Grace, you just got to do it in a different way. I said, you do your speech in sloth. And so like these speeches were a minute. So I said, you just do it in sloth. So, I practiced it with her. I said, so you get up in front of the class and say, good morning, class. So then you drag that on for a minute, and then you burned up your minute. Then you got a whole nother week to prepare. And she just loved that. So, so that became part of her whole repertoire, was this whole sloth thing. So the chewy, the chewy thing, and then the sloth thing. And oh my gosh, she just got that stuff.
Yeah. It came naturally to her. Do you remember when she picked up on the Chewbacca thing?
What did it was there was on the internet, there was going around at one point, it got millions of views, where this lady had bought this Chewbacca mask that made the noise.
I did see that on Instagram or something. Yeah.
And so when that was going around, then we bought one of those for her. So then, it became another piece of who she was.
Is that good? And there's the real Grace coming out doing her sound. All right. So long. Happy birthday, Grace.
So she had a Chewy bear. When it came with us to just about everything, she would have a way to dress it up, and it was neat.
I saw her deliver a Chewbacca-gram to her cousin, I guess, turning 8.
Yeah, that was actually her nephew. That's our youngest grandson.
That was great. At the age of 19, that's the last year that you spent with her in the flesh here.
Yeah.
That age for me, I can remember being 19. That's kind of, and for Grace, I imagine her friends in the co-op who had graduated high school, that's kind of the age where the pressures of culture and society start to settle on a kid, where he's thinking about college. What am I going to do? Who am I going to be? Were those questions ever upon her?
Sure, they were upon her. She would have graduated with that class, so she was in her last year, so she would have graduated. We didn't know exactly what she was going to do. She envisioned getting married, which she would have been a great wife and mom. I think she would have been fantastic. We actually built a what started out as a garage, it ended up becoming a second house slash apartment on our property so that Grace could live apart from us, but still with us. We bought her a convertible when she was 18, and I was teaching her to drive. I mean, so I would envision she would have got her driver's license.
Oh, you're doing great.
Hi, Paul. I'm driving this car I bought from you.
We were really teaching her to be totally independent, yet we knew you can't just leave her go, right? She was very high functioning, but she could have got taken advantage of very easy. So we were trying to do this in a way where we could still be involved, but have her have freedom at the same time. So, for example, maybe the biggest typical thing somebody does with a disabled child is when they turn 18, they apply for guardianship. And we did not do that. What we did instead was, in our state, they allow a thing called supported decision making. So we did supported decision making instead of guardianship. Where guardianship, you have complete control of the decisions. We didn't want that for her. In fact, then we set up a trust to take care of her after we'd be gone. And in interviewing trustees, they really didn't get our concepts. I mean, it would have taken a unique trustee. I thought we had that down, but of course we never executed it because Grace is gone. But so I would interview the trustees, and I can remember one of them. I just said, "Well, if Grace wanted new Suburban, what would you do?" And they said, "Well, we would encourage her to get her less expensive car." Maybe something like this. And I didn't want that. I wanted, it should be talked through with her. You shouldn't be telling her you need a less expensive car. You talk it through with her and make a decision. But they were trying to control her. You following?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So we didn't want that for her. We wanted her to have the freedom. So I actually never envisioned her going to college, although subsequent to her death, I learned there is a college that specializes in kids with Down syndrome in Wisconsin. So I would envision that she may have done that. She wanted to be a tour guide at Graceland. One thing on her mind, she envisioned working in the local grocery store. I don't know exactly why, but I mean, there's one of the movies with a Down syndrome actor in it. His name was Produce. He worked in a grocery store, and it could be because of that. I don't know. But it wouldn't have mattered. I don't, whatever she wanted to do was fine.
Yeah.
We would have just supported. I mean, she was, relative to being on her own, when she turned 18, she wanted to vote. And so we went and we got an ID. We had to go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, even though she didn't get a driver's license. That's where you got your IDs. So we go there, and then I set up an appointment with the branch manager of the local credit union where we bank, and to set up a checking account, because you got to have an ID. So then we set up the appointment. So we're in there in the branch manager's office, and we get the checking account all done. And the manager said to Grace, "Would you like to also have a credit card?" And Grace said, "Well, of course." And so then she says, "Well, what would you like the limit to be?" And she says 30. And the manager says $30. And Grace said, "No, 30,000."
That's a pretty good credit score.
Well, Grace was no dummy.
Yeah.
She knew Dad. She didn't understand co-signing or anything, but Dad was taking ownership of the bill, so might as well let her snap.
Okay, I'm going to segue now into one of these things I've got written here. In listening to your other interviews, you've used language to describe the change that race brought to your worldview. That really resonates with me. You talk about the American dream, and you talk about how that had been a pursuit of yours, and then she provided or facilitated a change in your pursuits and in the way that you, I guess, viewed the world. Regarding the pressures of the world, like when we talk about the American dream and those pressures, the pressures of culture or conforming or the things that we put value on, right? That we're encouraged to value. That's something I've struggled with as a man, as a provider, as a college graduate, a professional, a tradesman. Uh, reconciling the pressure I feel to define myself by these avenues
Right.
in contrast with Jesus's admonitions to not worry, don't store up treasure, to trust God, the daily bread, not like tomorrow's bread, like just to live in the moment with him. And
Yep.
that's, to me, that's childlikeness to be able to do that. And I see my children do it so well, and I envy them. And Grace was certainly that. Was she kind of your help from God in that way in transforming your view? She was an eye opener for you. And what was
Well, yeah, I
what
mean,
was the
I think
result of that?
I would say that's an understatement. Well, the result is that I became in progress. So I don't know that I'll ever arrive, but I mean, I became in progress. I think we can arrive. I mean, every time we're connected to God, we've arrived. Every time we're disconnected, we're sinning. So we can arrive, but we get in the way. I became a work in progress. It's a hard time to rely on somebody you can't see like Jesus. So then when you get to see somebody who's an angel on earth, um, it's different.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she changed everything. I mean, the first time I knew that she had a special relationship with God was when she was 6 or 7. My wife and I got into an argument, and she said to us, "Aren't you supposed to apologize?" And so I said, "Yes, that's right, Grace." And so we both said sorry. She had this intuition that you can't get at that age without having a relationship with God. Another example I'd give you, there was a man who I really don't care for, who lives in our local town. There's a couple reasons I don't care for him, but that doesn't really matter. But ultimately, Grace and I, and Cindy was there too. We were at the local county fair, and Grace and I were doing a ride, whatever. And we got done with the ride, and she just hops off because she sees this guy, and she just runs up to him and gives him a hug. And I sat there and I thought, I can't do that, but she can. It's fantastic. Um, you know, she's special. Um, how I'm sure you've told your wife a time or two, I'll be home at 6 o'clock, dear, and then you get home at 6:30, for example. Well, they don't like that. I don't know if you ever noticed, wives don't like that. But when I was late, Grace, she just was happy to see me. She
Not a
didn't care
vindictive bone in her body, huh?
Right. It was great. People at her funeral they said a lot, you guys did such a great job as a parent. And I was pretty frail at Grace's funeral because I just about died 3 days after she died. I had lost a lot of weight. I was still on oxygen, but I got a chance to do kind of a sermon, I guess you would call it, at her funeral. And I just, relative to that comment, I said, you don't get any credit for taking care of somebody like Grace. So everybody thinks we did such a great job, but we didn't do anything. You get credit for loving the unlovable, because you can't love the unlovable without relying on God. Grace was no work at all.
For my darling, I love you, and I always. Thank you very much.
I'm Grace Emily Schara. Soon have a great, wonderful day.
With that, we conclude the first half of our series on the amazing Grace with Mr. Scott Schara. You can find part 2 in your podcast feed. Talk to you there, friends. Cheers. Please submit written or audio summary of your story to outskirts@tannerandfriends.com. Yep.